I think we need to let things fail. We can't keep saving the day with taxpayers' money.
He has been navigating global financial markets for over 30 years, mastering the precise art of calculated risk through every major economic crash. Handpicked directly by Charlie Lee to take over the daily execution of the foundation, he is leading a quiet revolution to bring sound money closer to real-world scenarios. This is Alan Austin, and this is Foundations by Litecoin. Welcome to Foundations by Litecoin. I'm your host, Randi Hipper, and today we are here with Alan. Alan, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm so happy to have you. Thank you for having me out here in Amsterdam. And this is the first European Litecoin Summit. How do you feel about that?
I think it's good. It's important. We started the summit in 2018. I think this is our sixth summit. Until now, we've never left the U.S. But Litecoin's always been about global adoption and global reach, crossing borders. So it kind of makes sense that the summit should do the same at some point. And I think this is a big opportunity to come across where we can not only integrate more with other parts of areas of the world, but for people that can't always make it to the U.S., which is a difficult trip for many people, it allows people to participate too. So it's a real good way to kind of move a step closer towards what we could do to push education awareness about Litecoin and general adoption, I should say.
I agree with you. And we'll get back to Amsterdam in a moment, but you talk about people finding Litecoin. How did Litecoin find you?
Found me, I kind of come from a background of, through a grad school, I worked at a startup real estate technology company, and we ended up, it was a really amazing experience where we built this technology. We still ended up selling it to a company. And I stayed in the technology, real estate technology field. But one of the things I did is I got very involved with like finance and banks. And I worked with a lot of banks like Bank of America, Fannie Mae, these huge companies. And I saw how slow things were being done. Mm-hmm. And it was, at the time, of course, Bitcoin wasn't around, didn't know anything about that. But what I was experiencing was pretty wild. Like even then, how slow decisions were made, how slow, not only internally, but for clients. I mean, and then as I evolved into more of like a real estate selling side, I worked with a lot of clients and I saw how difficult it was for people to getting financing and loans. And always often being turned down for credit, but not necessarily for the, this person could be approved, this person might not be, but, not understanding the differences. And it was just always about the central parties making whatever decisions they felt like at any given time, and the very slow process. So I think naturally when I discovered Bitcoin, which was Bitcoin first, and really learned about it, it really clicked because I had a background where I understood what wasn't working. And I think that was really important to help me understand how Bitcoin might be the better solution.
Yeah, the problem and then the solution.
Exactly. So, and after brushing it off for a while, just because I was so busy with things, it was still around. I finally took a deep dive into it. I said, well, this makes sense. And I also love math. And I said, this has potential. And at the same time, Litecoin was one of about 3 cryptocurrencies on Coinbase. I wanted to get more involved, just volunteering on the side. I already had my business going. And so I thought Litecoin would be, maybe a place to reach out to the foundation to offer volunteer work. So yeah, a few months later, was brought aboard the foundation and started pretty much doing this and that. And at some point was brought over on the board. And then eventually Charlie asked me if I can fill in for his day-to-day role as managing director. And I think that was important because it gave him, it's a lot of tedious stuff, but it gave him the opportunity to step aside on the day-to-day stuff, but then focus more on project-oriented things and other things that he's still heavily working on. So that's kind of a very quick summary of that.
So the problem in mainstream finance or traditional finance was the exclusivity of the system. Yep. And what did you feel about, just watching people not get approved for certain things when you knew that this was something that was just completely unfair, and especially the debanking and just the lack of accessibility? Because I think we really look at things from a first world mindset of, we're just looking at Bitcoin as an investment. But for other people in other countries where a bank is a 1 to 3 day trip, this is something that's really important to them as well.
Yeah, it was, I hit my head against the wall many times with especially I was working with clients, and I actually my own experiences too. I did a lot of my own real estate projects, and I, I built, for example, a condo conversion project, and right during then the market crashed. All of a sudden, all these guidelines were changed, and it made it more difficult to sell and all these after a lot of money invested. Meanwhile, banks were getting bailed out, right? But the mom and pop type person like me that was just doing one single project here was getting squeezed because the guidelines didn't favor that person. So also just finding clients that were not approved for this or that and never getting a clear answer from the banks on why that was happening. And then one person was always pointing the finger at somebody else. It was just ridiculous stupidity. And nobody could even answer or even, I think many people realize this shouldn't be happening even within these companies and banks, but their fingers were, their hands were tied.
Yeah.
Because somewhere along the way, somebody says, this is what we're doing today. And then tomorrow could be different. So.
It's so funny that you're talking about the banks getting bailed out, because literally the genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain was Satoshi inscribing the message, and it was the headline from the Times, Chancellor on the brink for second bailout for banks. And it's just so interesting to see that the evolution of like why we're here and the fundamentals still remain, especially like right now what we're seeing is a lot of like bank collapses in the last few years. As someone that came from mainstream media, like what do you think of like the collapses in 2023 that started with like Silicon Valley Bank, and then it's just been a cascade ever since? But a lot of the time these banks that failed don't even hit the headlines.
Yeah, I think we need to let things fail. We need to let like the system work itself through. We can't keep saving the day with taxpayers' money. I mean, it's just, there's so many things we could talk about here, but anytime we're gonna banks bail out a bank, what do they learn? What happens? So meanwhile, they're making decisions not to finance different people. At the same time, we're bailing them out. It's kind of a wild thing to do. Eventually, I think the system, if the system isn't working and if they can't survive, let things kind of naturally take their course, then we need better solutions.
Yeah.
And that's pretty clear that that's what we do. And I think Bitcoin at the time and now Litecoin represent it's the people's money, right? You don't have these issues, and you're your own bank basically, and that holds a lot of promise. And I know there's been a lot of challenges naturally, because when you move from one system that's obviously big banks are heavily involved and a lot of money's involved to something else, there's a lot of resistance for a while, but we're changing. It's changing.
I feel like the banks are like the big bad wolf that blows their own house down sometimes, and they just they just keep making mistake after mistake after mistake and just expecting like band-aid after band-aid after band-aid. But at some point, like the house comes down, and so I think that it'll take a while, and maybe it won't be in the way we're thinking, because I really do think that Bitcoin and crypto would end up saving the banks, because they have to, evolve. They have to go to blockchain. And we're starting to see that now with tokenization, institutional players coming through. And what do you think of the last like few years where we had like Bitcoin ETFs and Litecoin ETFs and just all these things coming into play? Do you think the institutions like are kind of taking away from our messaging, or do you think it's even stronger because we have them involved?
Yeah, I think it's sort of mixed. I mean, in some ways, I think kind of wising up to the fact that if we can't, beat them, join them, and we need to be involved in one way or another. I'm not sure. It depends on how these institutions are getting involved. I think, ETFs are in general for public awareness and adoption, and because not everybody wants to hold self-custody their funds. It's a learning process, a learning curve, and there's risks to that too. So for some people, it's easier to hold through ETFs, and maybe it's retirement money that's harder to put into like directly into say Bitcoin or Litecoin. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a big market for that, and I think it's good for awareness. But at the same time, I think it's important to like kind of find that balance. Like what are, depends on what banks are actually doing, how far they're going. And I think there's a big education gap still.
I agree. I agree.
You're talking about, well, maybe Bitcoin or Litecoin or something will save the day, but that also takes, I think, education, people becoming aware of why it's better, right? Because right now it's just such a small market of people that understand what better money means. Mm-hmm. So as long as that happens, they're just going to be hoping for that next bank bailout. Right. And it's not, and without realizing there are better ways, better solutions where you don't have to stress about those types of things.
It's truly sad, in my opinion. And from your perspective, because you were just saying maybe people don't want to custody their own crypto, what would you say to somebody that is nervous to be their own bank? How would you define being your own bank and what that means to a person?
Yeah, I think it means different things. But when we say self-custody, we mean like basically you're holding your own money, like say in a hardware wallet or somewhere where it's unlike keeping your money in a bank account where that money is not even really there. It's being lent out and that's being lent out and so forth. Or even say having your coins on an exchange where, they're just moving from one wallet to another and a much larger risk at some point that maybe something happens with the exchange. There's a lot more trust involved there, right? You don't have to have that kind of trust. I mean, you can trust in yourself by getting your own self-custody solution. I think ultimately as people get as a newbie, it might be easier to just buying a small amount, use an exchange, say a Coinbase or something, to get your feet wet. And it's kind of a first step, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. As you get more involved, you may realize that, okay, I have the ability to hold my own coins, and no matter what happens to that exchange or anything else, that bank, I'm still okay. So
Yeah.
it's a learning curve. I don't think people expect everybody to jump right into self-custody, but it's there, and that's important that it's always there for you.
Yeah, I think the more
Is
and
an
more
option.
people are just moving forward in the last few years, the more people really want to have control over their money, whether that's like getting a safe and adding cash in that in their house or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. People are just starting to want to trust themselves more and take on that responsibility because it truly is one. But I think you, as the managing director of Litecoin Foundation, you also have a responsibility to boost adoption of this cryptocurrency. Why is Litecoin adoption like where it is right now? Like we've gone so
Yeah.
far in the development and MWeb. Like, what do you think about where we are now and where we're going to go within the next 5 years?
Yeah. So specifically, you mean, well, if we're talking about crypto in general or Litecoin specifically or
Litecoin.
both? Because I think so. One of the interesting things about Litecoin is it's a very crowded space, and there's a lot of noise in the space. It's highly driven by narratives, memes, everything else that you see. But if you really kind of dig deep, there's only really a handful of projects that have stood the test of time and, real sound money, have all the characteristics that make something really good money. And that might not be like the sexiest thing or the most popular thing, but it's truly one of the most valuable things. I think where Litecoin has struggled a little bit is that because of all this, noise in the space, it's an interesting thing where I think Litecoin has all of the properties that people say they want, but it's often overlooked. Again, because there's so many other, it's a narrative-driven kind of space. And I think we're aware of that as a foundation. And one of the things we've always been kind of conservative, but we need to maybe push harder in certain areas and really do more. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow, but more storytelling, more image framing, where we can really help people understand why it's important, not explain what it does, but create scenarios that you can relate to, like in your own personal life, and then kind of bring in Litecoin and explain how Litecoin can then help you. Because I think most people can relate better if you bring in like real world scenarios and not just say, well, you could say it's the great money, it's got privacy, it's got all these other things. But, for a lot of people that aren't even involved in the space, or, it doesn't necessarily resonate or mean much today, unless they have a bad experience with something or they have, something major happens in the world. But if you can start sharing stories and things that people have had these frustrations, slowly they can sort of get it, and they can slowly, kind of transition into something better. So I think there's Litecoin's not going anywhere. I think all the other metrics, price aside, are continuing to grow strong. And I think ultimately Litecoin will have its day in the sun in terms of price too. Because at the end of the day, all the hype in the world doesn't keep something alive, and it won't. I mean, it might keep it alive for a little while, but
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. Yeah. I think there's going to be very few sustainable projects at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think people wait until things become a necessity for them to do it. And I feel like it goes back to the phrase like Bitcoin doesn't need the world needs Bitcoin. I would argue like, that Litecoin doesn't need the world needs Litecoin. And so when people like, there's been a few things like you can even look at a real world scenario like Iran, at the end of 2025 going into 2026, the people started to rebel against the regime and then the currency collapsed. It was worthless against the dollar. And how did people maintain purchasing power? That was through Bitcoin, and communication and money movement was still through Bitcoin. And I think, when people really wake up to, Litecoin, and I think, people really are awake to Litecoin. I just think that like you said, the hype isn't there. But when you look through the numbers, it actually is, because it is the most liquid cryptocurrency. It is the most transacted cryptocurrency. So when you look at like real world money and transacting every day, do you think that's going to be Litecoin that people are going to be using on a daily basis, or one of them that people will be using on a daily basis?
I definitely believe it's going to be one of a handful of whatever those coins may be. I mean, Bitcoin's arguably a great store of value, but as Litecoin becomes more and more used as money, it also becomes a greater and greater store of value. So I do believe it. It has arguably almost, if not perfect money in terms of its properties. And it has this privacy layer that's optional, which really makes it that much better money, because this kind of privacy layer in Litecoin, where it's confidentiality when you want it, is no different than we have today. Think about like when you pay with cash, right? Nobody knows how much is in your wallet. Nobody knows how much is in your bank. Nobody can trace that purchase to something else. It's really the same if you pay with a credit card. I mean, even though credit cards go through a bank, nobody else knows, like when you pay with that credit card, like the merchant doesn't
Yeah,
know
it's
how
not
much
all
is in your
blessed,
account,
you
right?
know? Yeah.
Well, we don't even have that today with the transparent blockchain. So at the very least, Litecoin's privacy layer, it adds basically what people are already accustomed to with traditional finance. So I think it's not anything less than that would be going a step backward for people.
Hmm.
So I don't, and nobody's going to want that. So I think it's an easier transition to understand that we already have these things. Litecoin's now providing these similar things here. And it's a gradual approach because you don't have to immediately jump right into privacy. So you can start by getting a feel of Litecoin. All of a sudden you value privacy more. Now you can try with privacy. At this point, I think it strikes a really good balance, the privacy layer being optional and all the other values that Litecoin contributes. It's time tested. It's been working like nonstop since, what are we going on almost 15 years now?
Yeah, it's been a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, that may not mean much to some people because there's so much hype, but at the end of the day, you want to know you could trust the system you're using.
Exactly. That's my biggest complaint sometimes is that some blockchains just always go down. And if I'm thinking of tokenizing real estate deeds or even college diplomas, like something so simple as a birth certificate, you're going to want that to always be accessible. And I know that Litecoin is always accessible and people do inscriptions. There's obviously, just a bunch of things that people are minting on Litecoin, which is so exciting. And I think privacy is a basic human right. I think everybody's entitled to privacy. So MWeb, I think, is so important to the rest of the world. I think, especially if you think about human rights and that type of movement, especially as a woman in another country, like I may not be able to do what I do and speak what I talk about every single day, and I want to get myself out of a situation. I would use something like Litecoin MLab to save my life. And I really do think, it could be an extreme way of looking at it, but I really do think that blockchain, especially MWeb on Litecoin, could save lives.
And that's because Litecoin's been there and it's trustworthy and it hasn't
Absolutely.
had.
It's everywhere too. And it's like everywhere Bitcoin is listed, like Litecoin's right there with it. So I think, if you had to say anything to people that are curious about Litecoin, that are looking to maybe hop into the ecosystem, what is one message you would want to send them?
Well, let me touch on your point. So you make a good point about, so Litecoin is really good money. I mean, it's really good money. But we're also seeing a lot of interest in like experimenting on top of Litecoin's blockchain for other use cases. And this is exciting. This is really exciting stuff because, I think going back to what you said, at the end of the day, no matter what you build, it's only as strong as whatever you're building on top of. I mean, think if you're building a house, right? You start with the foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that foundation is not poured right, it doesn't matter what you put on top of it. And that's why I think about, these projects that are building on certain blockchains, but your project, again, is only as good as the blockchain it's on. So Litecoin is a fantastic foundation, no pun intended, for these other potential applications, which are exciting. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to come with Litecoin. Understand, get to know crypto and then really learn what's important and understand that money is arguably the strongest use case for cryptocurrency. And, it's okay. Like, look around and understand there's other exciting things going on, but understand, if you've had these experiences with your banks or other things in your life, or see what's going on, see how your dollar is worth so much less today than it was before, or your euro, whatever currency you're using. Understand the reasons why that's happening, and you'll understand how Litecoin offers a much better solution.
I'm with you.
That. Yeah.
100%. And someone that's curious about Litecoin and wants to hop in, what's your message?
Yeah, so there's a lot of resources out there. I mean, you can go to litecoin.com for starters. We have a bunch of resources there to get started. You can, start learning. You can download a wallet. You can come to a summit like we have today. We do this annually in different places.
Only $84.
We're here to support you. We'll help with third-party support. So there's a lot of resources. And if you don't know something, ask. The Litecoin community is pretty amazing and they'll help you.
They are resilient too. And the best thing about, I think, the Litecoin community is there's so many OGs here and just the people that are just tried, true, and just tested in this space. Like they're still here. Especially Charlie. I just want to give him a lot of props as well and give him his flowers because he's just stood the test of time. Like he's been here since Coinbase and he just relentlessly builds. And I just have a lot of respect for you coming on the foundation and building something that is just so unique and important to the space. I don't think crypto would be the same without Charlie. I don't think it would be the same without Litecoin, especially the foundation, just level-headed and conservative, as you said, which people sometimes, are like, why aren't you doing more? But it's just, you have to see how everything pans out. And in my opinion, when you look at crypto, there's a lot of people that just keep jumping, but then sometimes they just overshoot and they fall off the ledge, where Litecoin is just consistent and it just keeps going. And that's why, you know, when we hit the edge, oh yeah, we do see an exit right here, let's go here, and then, you know, go on a different road. So I really do have a lot of respect for you at the foundation, and thank you for what you're doing. If there's anything you want to tell people that are frustrated with this market right now, they need motivation. Like, where are we going? Are we going to be okay, Alan?
We're going to be okay. Look, I've been beyond crypto. I've been investing for, my God, maybe 30, I don't know how many years, you know, and I've always been a pretty big risk taker, but I calculate a risk, you know.